feeling. When even just getting out of bed feels like a huge effort.
Yeah.
When the little everyday things start feeling, I don't know, monumentally draining.
Yeah.
And that spark, that joy you used to have, it feels like it's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we're diving deep into something I think a lot of us deal with, emotional burnout, and crucially, how we can maybe start to heal from it.
And what's really key to get right off the bat is that burnout, as our source today points out, that's the Therapist's Handbook for Healing from Emotional Burnout by Ronan Danziger. It isn't just being really, really tired.
Yeah.
It's this deep kind of pervasive exhaustion. It seeps into your emotional state, your physical energy, your mental clarity. It's way more than just needing a good holiday.
Exactly. So our mission here in this deep dive is to pull out the really important insights from this handbook for you. We want to help you understand not just what burnout actually is and maybe where it comes from, but also give you some actionable first steps, things you can actually start doing to feel a bit better. We're aiming for those, aha moments that click quickly without making you feel buried under tons of information.
Right. So the handbook defines burnout as a state of emotional, physical, and mental depletion. Think of it like a phone battery that's been run down way too low for way too long, and now it just won't recharge properly.
Right.
And this usually happens gradually. It sort of erodes your energy, your ability to focus, and that sense of joy you mentioned. And often people going through burnout start to feel really disconnected.
Disconnected how?
Well, disconnected from their own feelings sometimes, or from things they used to love doing, even from the people around them.
And the handbook breaks this down into three main parts,
Yeah.
right? First is emotional exhaustion. Now, this isn't just being wiped out after a long day. It's this deep feeling of being emotionally drained, even by small stuff.
Right. Little demands feel huge.
Right. Yeah. You might find yourself snapping at people or maybe feeling kind of numb, like you just can't drum up any emotion. That weariness, it goes beyond just needing sleep, and maybe you notice you've lost that get up and go for things you used to be really into.
Absolutely. And then the second part is cynicism and detachment.
Okay.
This is where you might see a real shift in attitude, maybe becoming more negative or distant, kind of indifferent towards work or relationships or just life.
So things that used to be exciting now feel like a chore.
Exactly. Just another thing on the list. And social withdrawal can be part of this too, creating emotional distance. What's interesting, though, is that this detachment often starts as a kind of self-protection mechanism when you're feeling totally overwhelmed.
Like putting up shields.
Yeah, like your mind's trying to protect itself. But the downside is it can lead to feeling really isolated, like nothing really matters anymore. Imagine someone who used to love their job suddenly just dreading Monday mornings. That's a classic sign of this dimension.
Okay. And the third part, which the handbook mentions, is this reduced sense of personal accomplishment or professional efficacy.
Right. That feeling that you're just spinning your wheels. Like, despite all the effort, you're not really getting anywhere, struggling to keep up, and maybe feeling like your work doesn't even make a difference.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, the handbook also lists a whole bunch of common symptoms, right?
Yeah.
Across different areas of well-being.
Oh, definitely. Emotionally, you might find a real lack of motivation. Just no drive to do things you used to enjoy or even things you need to do. Feelings of sadness, maybe even hopelessness, can start to creep in. And it's important here, while burnout isn't the same as clinical depression, being burnt out for a long time can make you more vulnerable to depressive symptoms.
That's a really important distinction.
It is. Overwhelm is another huge one, that feeling of being totally swamped, unable to cope. And you might also feel this kind of inner emptiness or numbness just going through the motions.
And physically, what shows up there?
Well, a major sign is chronic tiredness. Like deep fatigue that doesn't get better even if you sleep for ages.
Right, sleep doesn't fix it.
Exactly. And speaking of sleep problems are super common. Trouble falling asleep, waking up a lot, waking up way too early and just lying there.
Ugh, yeah.
Cognitively, you might find it really hard to focus or concentrate, even on simple stuff. And then, yeah, there can be physical symptoms too. Frequent headaches, muscle tension, tight neck and shoulders, or even digestive issues. The handbook mentions those in its self-assessment examples.
Okay. And how might it show up in how we act behaviorally?
You might notice yourself getting more irritable or impatient, snapping more easily, losing interest and joy in things you used to love, and that really disheartening feeling that your efforts just don't matter. Plus, maybe general anxiety, restlessness, or that emotional numbness we talked about. The handbook actually includes a pretty useful self-assessment with questions to help you spot these in yourself.
Yeah, I saw those. Things like, Do you feel physically and emotionally exhausted most days? Or is it hard to concentrate, feeling detached, trouble sleeping, feeling overwhelmed? It's probably worth it, if you're listening, just to pause and think if those resonate.
Definitely. And the way the handbook helps interpret those results is useful too. It talks about mild burnout, maybe exhaustion, more irritability, a dip in motivation, sort of early warning signs.
Okay.
Moderate burnout might mean more persistent fatigue, sleep issues, more cynicism, and you start seeing it affect work or relationships.
Right.
And severe burnout, according to the handbook, is when you feel constantly drained, detached, maybe physically unwell, finding it hard to function day to day. And at that point, they really recommend seeking professional help.
But it's just a starting point, right?
Yeah.
Not a diagnosis.
Exactly. So important to remember. It's a check-in, a way to gauge where you might be, but not a replacement for a proper evaluation if you're really concerned.
Okay, so now we have a much clearer picture of what emotional burnout actually is. Let's shift gears and look at where it comes from. The handbook makes a really crucial point here. Burnout often has roots in systemic issues. It's not just about you, the individual, failing somehow.
Exactly. That's so important. And there's this common trap, this constant chasing of external success markers, validation from the outside.
The next promotion, the bigger house.
Right. It's what the handbook might call a goals over process mindset. We get so fixated on hitting that next milestone, thinking that's where happiness is, that we totally miss the present moment and the potential satisfaction in the journey itself,
Yeah, deferring happiness.
Constantly. And it creates this never-ending cycle of dissatisfaction because the goalpost always moves. The insight here is that real satisfaction also comes from the process, not just the end point.
And the handbook brings in some ancient wisdom here, which I thought was interesting. Like Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, the Stoic emperor. His point was that our real power isn't over external events, we can't control those, but over our own minds, our reactions, our actions. Focus on inner resilience, not outcomes.
And Miyamoto Musashi.
The samurai. Right. He talked about detachment from desires and expectations, finding mastery and peace through the dedicated practice of your craft, the process itself, not just winning. It's such a contrast to our modern results-obsessed culture.
Yeah, definitely. The handbook uses this example, James. A corporate executive, always chasing the next promotion, thinking that would be it, but the feeling never lasted.
Right. And the suggestion is, what if he shifted focus, found fulfillment in, say, mentoring younger staff or deepening his skills, reframing his work as meaningful, appreciating small daily wins? That could be way more sustainable.
So goals aren't bad, but being totally identified with the outcome is the problem.
Precisely. It's about finding a healthier balance, being present, valuing growth, finding that intrinsic reward in what you're actually doing.
Okay, then there's the comparison cycle. Oh man, I think everyone relates to this, right? Especially now.
Absolutely. The handbook gives examples like Raj, an entrepreneur glued to social media, feeling inadequate compared to peers.
Or Maria, a stay-at-home mom, comparing her life to friends with seemingly fancy careers.
Yeah. And the core insight is simple but powerful. Constantly measuring your internal reality against someone else's curated highlight reel is basically a setup for feeling bad, no matter how well you're actually doing.
It just fuels inadequacy and exhaustion.
Totally. And tied into that is digital overload, which feels incredibly relevant.
Oh, for sure. That constant connection, the expectation to be available 24/7, checking emails at 10 p.m., it's this relentless cognitive load. Our brains just never switch off.
Exactly. The insight there is that this constant digital noise and the blurring of work-life boundaries really eats away at our ability to truly disconnect and recover.
The handbook mentions Emily, someone constantly checking work stuff on her phone, never really unwinding.
And it led to exhaustion, sleep problems, headaches. Her story really shows the toll this always-on thing can take.
And it's funny, even with remote work, those boundaries can get even blurrier, right?
Oh, yeah. It's so easy to fall into the just one more email trap. The handbook mentions Alex doing this, and suddenly the whole evening is gone. The key point is, without clear boundaries, even flexible work can lead straight to overwork and burnout.
Right. And then there's perfectionism.
Yep.
And those crazy expectations from, like, hustle culture.
That constant pressure to be flawless, always productive, it creates chronic stress, constant self-doubt. The insight is that striving for unattainable perfection means you never feel good enough, which is a huge burnout contributor.
Yeah, never measuring up. Okay, what about people-pleasing? I feel like that's a big one, too.
Definitely. That need for external validation, maybe a fear of conflict, it leads to having really weak boundaries. overextending yourself constantly.
The handbook calls it the slippery slope of yes.
Which is perfect. Every time you say yes when you mean no, it just adds to that emotional burden. The core idea is prioritizing everyone else's needs over your own just drains your resources and leaves you wide open to burnout.
And finally, it touches on how early experiences, like childhood patterns, can make us more vulnerable.
Yeah, briefly. Those early experiences can sometimes set up beliefs or tendencies, maybe around workaholism or difficulty setting boundaries that make burnout more likely later on.
Wow. Okay, so burnout really has these deep, tangled roots. Now let's look at the impact. How does it actually affect our well-being? The handbook talks about intrusive negative thoughts, rumination.
Right. Your mind feels like a battlefield, constantly replaying mistakes, worrying endlessly about the future, that negative self-talk.
Yeah.
When the handbook mentions Sarah, a lawyer, high achiever, whose mind just wouldn't shut up with negativity, her realizing, hey, this isn't normal, I need help, that was her first step to recovery. The insight is that this constant negative loop drains mental energy and just amplifies stress and feeling inadequate.
And then there's emotional withdrawal, isolation.
Yeah, that urge to just pull away, avoid social stuff, become emotionally unavailable, even with people you're close to. You feel unseen, detached.
That's ironic, right? You isolate yourself when connection is what you probably need most.
Exactly. That's the paradox the handbook points out. Burnout pushes you away just when support is crucial for healing. And interestingly, it can even make it harder to empathize with others.
Really? How so?
Well, when your own emotional tank is completely empty, totally depleted, it's just really hard to tune into someone else's feelings or offer genuine support. Another cruel irony, really.
Wow. And physically, we touched on this, but the handbook calls it the body's silent cry.
Yeah, those physical signs of chronic stress, persistent muscle aches, tension, that restless sleep that leaves you exhausted, and just deep, unrelenting fatigue that rest doesn't fix. Sleep issues and chronic fatigue are really key physical markers.
And finally, how does it affect personal growth, our sense of self?
It can really lead to stagnation. You lose excitement, enthusiasm. Things that were passions start feeling like obligations. Dreams feel miles away. It can lead to feelings of emptiness, a lack of purpose. The insight is burnout doesn't just drain energy, it can erode your sense of who you are and what matters to you.
It's clear the impact is huge. Now, something the handbook stresses, and I think it's really vital, is the difference between burnout and depression.
Yes, super important. There's overlap in symptoms, but they're distinct conditions. Different primary causes, often needing different approaches to heal.
Right, and mixing them up means you might not get the right help.
Exactly. The handbook uses Michael and Emily as examples, both exhausted, struggling to concentrate, but the root causes and best recovery paths might differ significantly. Misdiagnosis is a missed opportunity.
And you can see why people get confused, right? The constant drain, sleep issues, concentration problems, sadness, hopelessness. They can look similar on the surface.
They can. The handbook offers a kind of mini self-check, asking questions like, are your symptoms mostly tied to work and get better when you're away? Or do they affect everything?
Okay.
Is the hopelessness about your job specifically? Or is it a more general negative view of yourself and the future? Does the exhaustion lift a bit with rest or a break? Or does it stick around no matter what?
And the takeaway there is,
if the answers lean towards pervasive sadness and hopelessness across all areas of life, it's really crucial to get a professional evaluation for potential depression. Don't just assume it's burnout.
right, the examples of Alex, the marketing manager, cynical about work but okay otherwise, versus Janie with sadness coloring everything. That really clarifies the difference.
It does. So, okay, we've looked at what burnout is, its roots, its impact, and how it differs from depression. Now let's get to the really practical stuff. Those first steps towards healing. The handbook really emphasizes starting with mindset, introducing the thought-feeling-behavior loop.
Okay, break that down.
Here.
The loop.
Basically, our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all interconnected. A negative thought triggers a bad feeling, which might lead you to, say, avoid something, and that avoidance then reinforces the original negative thought. It's a cycle.
Right. Makes sense.
And when you're burned out, your thoughts often become really negative and distorted. The handbook mentions things like catastrophizing, always expecting the worst.
Jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, without evidence. And emotional reasoning, believing something's true just because it feels true. These patterns just sabotage your self-worth and keep you stuck.
So the first step is just noticing these thoughts.
Yeah.
Becoming aware.
Exactly. Awareness is key. Then, actively questioning and challenging them. The handbook suggests a technique called rewriting your mental script.
Yeah, how does that work?
It uses an example like, I'm failing at everything. Step 1, identify the thought. Step 2, challenge it. Look for actual evidence against it. Consider other, more balanced viewpoints. Step 3, reframe it. Turn it into something more constructive, realistic, supportive.
So instead of I'm failing at everything, maybe, I'm facing challenges, but I'm learning, and I've handled tough stuff before.
Precisely. It's about creating a more balanced inner dialogue. And the handbook also introduces ACT acceptance and commitment therapy as another really helpful approach.
ACT. What's the core idea there?
It focuses on psychological flexibility and mindfulness. Psychological flexibility basically means being able to adapt your thoughts and actions to align with your values, what really matters to you, even when you're dealing with difficult feelings.
Okay. And mindfulness fits in how?
The being present part of ACT is about connecting with the present moment, noticing thoughts, feelings, sensations with openness, without judging them, just observing.
Not trying to push unpleasant feelings away.
Right. That leads to the opening up part, which involves acceptance, allowing experiences, even tough ones, to be there without fighting them, and diffusion, learning to step back from your thoughts.
Diffusion, like detaching from them.
Kind of. Seeing them as just mental events, words, stories your mind creates, not absolute truths you have to obey. The handbook uses the example. If your mind says, I'm terrible at this, instead of buying into it.
You just notice it.
Yeah, you might think, there's that I'm terrible at this thought again. It creates space, weakens the thought's power over you.
Okay. So bringing it all together then for you, listening to this deep dive. Burnout is real. It's distinct. Hits us emotionally, physically, mentally.
Often rooted in bigger systems, but personal patterns like perfectionism or comparison can make it worse.
It impacts well-being hugely, but it's not the same as depression that's key.
Right. And those first steps towards feeling better often involve noticing and challenging negative thoughts, maybe using some CBT ideas, and starting to explore ACT principles like acceptance and diffusion for more flexibility.
So the big question for you, the listener, after hearing all this,
Yeah, now that you have this deeper understanding and maybe some initial tools, what's one small thing, one tiny step you could take this week just to begin shifting your perspective or maybe a behavior?
could be just pausing to notice your thoughts for a minute.
Could be. Or trying a short mindfulness exercise. Anything small to start?
Definitely something valuable to think about. And look, if this deep dive has resonated, if you're thinking, yeah, that sounds like me, we really do recommend checking out the source, The Therapist's Handbook for Healing from Emotional Burnout.
Absolutely. It's packed with more strategies, more guidance, a really practical resource if you want to continue this journey towards feeling better and recovering.